Chapter 24, Phantastes, a Fairy Romance for Men and Women, by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Copeland.
Chapter 24. We are ne'er like angels till our passions die. Decker. This wretched inn, where we scarce stay to bait, we call our dwelling place. We call one step a race. But angels in their full enlightened state, angels who live and know what 'tis to be, who all the nonsense of our language see, who speak things, and our words, their ill-drawn pictures, scorn, when we by a foolish figure say, Behold an old man dead, then they speak properly, and cry, Behold a man-child born. Coolly. I was dead, and right content. I lay in my coffin with my hands folded in peace. The night and the lady I loved wept over me. Her tears fell on my face. Ah, said the night, I rushed amongst them like a madman. I hewed them down like brushwood. Their swords battered me like hail, but hurt me not. I cut a lane through to my friend. He was dead, but he had throttled the monster, and I had to cut the handful out of his throat before I could disengage and carry off his body. They dared not molest me as I brought him back. He has died well, said the lady. My spirit rejoiced. They left me to my repose. I felt as if a cool hand had been laid upon my heart and had stilled it. My soul was like a summer evening after a heavy fall of rain, when the drops are yet glistening on the trees in the last rays of the down-going sun, and the wind of the twilight has begun to blow. The hot fever of life had gone by, and I breathed the clear mountain air of the land of death. I had never dreamed of such blessedness. It was not that I had in any way ceased to be what I had been. The very fact that anything can die implies the existence of something that cannot die, which must either take to itself another form, as when the seed that is sown dies and arises again, or, in conscious existence, may, perhaps, continue to lead a purely spiritual life. If my passions were dead, the souls of the passions, those essential mysteries of the spirit which had embodied themselves in the passions, and had given to them all their glory and wonderment, yet lived, yet glowed with a pure, undying fire. They rose above their vanishing earthly garments, and disclosed themselves angels of light. But oh, how beautiful beyond the old form! I lay thus for a time, and lived, as it were, an unradiating existence. My soul a motionless lake, that received all things and gave nothing back, satisfied in still contemplation and spiritual consciousness. Ere long they bore me to my grave. Never tired child lay down in his white bed and heard the sound of his playthings being laid aside for the night with a more luxurious satisfaction of repose than I knew when I felt the coffin settle on the firm earth and heard the sound of the falling mold upon its lid. It has not the same hollow rattle within the coffin that it sends up to the edge of the grave. They buried me in no graveyard. They loved me too much for that, I thank them. But they laid me in the grounds of their own castle amid many trees, where, as it was springtime, were growing primroses and bluebells and all the families of the woods. Now that I lay in her bosom, the whole earth and each of her many births was as a body to me at my will. I seemed to feel the great heart of the mother beating into mine and feeding me with her own life, her own essential being and nature. I heard the footsteps of my friends above, and they sent a thrill through my heart. I knew that the helpers had gone, and that the knight and the lady remained, and spoke low, gentle, tearful words of him who lay beneath the yet wounded sod. I rose into a single large primrose that grew by the edge of the grave, and from the window of its humble, trusting face looked full in the countenance of the lady. I felt that I could manifest myself in the primrose, that it said a part of what I wanted to say, just as in the old time I had used to betake myself to a song for the same end. The flower caught her eye. She stooped and plucked it, saying, "Oh, you beautiful creature," and lightly kissing it, put it in her bosom. It was the first kiss she had ever given me, but the flower soon began to wither, and I forsook it. It was evening. The sun was below the horizon, but his rosy beams yet illuminated a feathery cloud that floated high above the world. I arose, I reached the cloud, and throwing myself upon it, floated with it in sight of the sinking sun. He sank, and the cloud grew grey, but the greyness touched not my heart. It carried its rose hue within, for now I could love without needing to be loved again. The moon came gliding up with all the past in her wan face. She changed my couch into a ghostly pallor, and threw all the earth below as to the bottom of a pale sea of dreams. But she could not make me sad. I knew now that it is by loving, and not by being loved, that one can come nearest the soul of another. Yea, that where two love, it is the loving of each other, and not the being loved by each other, that originates and perfects and assures their blessedness. I knew that love gives to him that loveth power over any soul beloved, even if that soul know him not, bringing him inwardly close to that spirit, a power that cannot be but for good. For in proportion as selfishness intrudes, the love ceases, and the power which springs therefrom dies. Yet all love will one day meet with its return. All true love will one day behold its own image in the eyes of the beloved, and be humbly glad. This is possible in the realms of lofty death. Ah, my friends, thought I, how I will tend you, and wait upon you, and haunt you with my love. My floating chariot bore me over a great city. Its faint, dull sound steamed up into the air, a sound how composed, how many hopeless cries, thought I, and how many mad shouts go to make up the tumult. Here, so faint, where I float in eternal peace, knowing that they will one day be stilled in the surrounding calm, and that despair dies into infinite hope, and the seeming impossible there is the law here. But, oh, pale-faced women and gloomy-browed men and forgotten children, how I will wait on you and minister to you, and, putting my arms about you in the dark, think hope into your hearts when you fancy no one is near. Soon as my senses have all come back, and have grown accustomed to this new blessed life, I will be among you with the love that healeth. With this, a pang and a terrible shudder went through me. A writhing as of death convulsed me, and I became once again conscious of a more limited, even a bodily and earthly life.
End of chapter 24. Recording by Thomas Copeland. Chapter 25. Phantastes, a Faerie Romance for Men and Women by George MacDonald. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Thomas Copeland.
Chapter 25. Our life is no dream, but it ought to become one, and perhaps will. Novalis. And on the grund which is me moeders gate, ik knock with me staff, elich and late, and say to her, leve mother, let me in. Chaucer, The Partner's Tale. Sinking from such a state of ideal bliss into the world of shadows which again closed around and enfolded me, my first dread was, not unnaturally, that my own shadow had found me again, and that my torture had commenced anew. It was a sad revulsion of feeling. This indeed seemed to correspond to what we think death is before we die. Yet I felt within me a power of calm endurance to which I had hitherto been a stranger. For, in truth, that I should be able, if only to think such things as I had been thinking, was an unspeakable delight. An hour of such peace made the turmoil of a lifetime worth striving through. I found myself lying in the open air in the early morning before sunrise. Over me rose the summer heaven, expectant of the sun. The clouds already saw him coming from afar, and soon every dewdrop would rejoice in his individual presence within it. I lay motionless for a few minutes, and then slowly rose and looked about me. I was on the summit of a little hill. A valley lay beneath, and a range of mountains closed up the view upon that side. But to my horror, across the valley and up the height of the opposing mountains stretched from my very feet a hugely expanding shade. There it lay, long and large, dark and mighty. I turned away with a sick despair, when lo, I beheld the sun just lifting his head above the eastern hill, and the shadow that fell from me lay only where his beams fell not. I danced for joy. It was only the natural shadow that goes with every man who walks in the sun. As he arose, higher and higher, the shadow head sank down the side of the opposite hill, and crept in across the valley towards my feet. Now that I was so joyously delivered from this fear, I saw and recognized the country around me. In the valley below lay my own castle, and the haunts of my childhood were all about me hastened home. My sisters received me with unspeakable joy, but I suppose they observed some change in me, for a kind of respect, with a slight touch of awe in it, mingled with their joy, and made me ashamed. They had been in great distress about me. On the morning of my disappearance, they had found the floor of my room flooded, and all that day a wondrous and nearly impervious mist had hung about the castle and grounds. I had been gone, they told me, 21 days. To me it seemed 21 years. Nor could I yet feel quite secure in my new experiences. When at night I lay down once more in my own bed, I did not feel at all sure that when I awoke I should not find myself in some mysterious region of fairyland. My dreams were incessant and perturbed, but when I did awake, I saw clearly that I was in my own home. My mind soon grew calm, and I began the duties of my new position, somewhat instructed, I hoped, by the adventures that had befallen me in fairyland. Could I translate the experience of my travels there into common life? This was the question. Or must I live it all over again, and learn it all over again, in the other forms that belong to the world of men, whose experience yet runs parallel to that of fairyland? These questions I cannot answer yet, but I fear. Even yet I find myself looking round sometimes with anxiety to see whether my shadow falls right away from the sun or no. I have never yet discovered any inclination to either side, and, if I am not unfrequently sad, I yet cast no more of a shade on the earth than most men who have lived in it as long as I. I have a strange feeling sometimes that I am a ghost, sent into the world to minister to my fellow men, or rather to repair the wrongs I have already done. May the world be brighter for me, at least in those portions of it where my darkness falls not. Thus I, who set out to find my ideal, came back rejoicing that I had lost my shadow. When the thought of the blessedness I experienced after my death in fairyland is too high for me to lay hold upon it and hope in it, I often think of the wise woman in the cottage, and of her solemn assurance that she knew something too good to be told. When I am oppressed by any sorrow or real perplexity, I often feel as if I had only left her cottage for a time, and would soon return out of the vision into it again. Sometimes, on such occasions, I find myself, unconsciously almost, looking about for the mystic mark of red, with the vague hope of entering her door, and being comforted by her wise tenderness. I then console myself by saying, I have come through the door of dismay, and the way back from the world into which that has led me is through my tomb. Upon that the red sign lies, and I shall find it one day, and be glad. I will end my story with the relation of an incident which befell me a few days ago. I had been with my reapers, and when they ceased their work at noon, I had lain down under the shadow of a great ancient beech tree that stood on the edge of the field. As I lay, with my eyes closed, I began to listen to the sound of the leaves overhead. At first they made sweet, inarticulate music alone, but by and by the sound seemed to begin to take shape, and to be gradually moulding itself into words, till at last I seemed able to distinguish these half dissolved in a little ocean of circumfluent tones. A great good is coming, is coming, is coming to thee, Anodos. And so over and over again. I fancied that the sound reminded me of the voice of the ancient woman in the cottage that was foursquare. I opened my eyes, and for a moment almost believed that I saw her face, with its many wrinkles and its young eyes, looking at me from between two hoary branches of the beech overhead. But when I looked more keenly, I saw only twigs and leaves, and the infinite sky, in tiny spots, gazing through between. Yet I know that good is coming to me, that good is always coming, though few have at all times the simplicity and the courage to believe it. What we call evil is the only and best shape which, for the person and his condition at the time, could be assumed by the best good. And so, farewell.
End of chapter 25. Recording by Thomas Copeland. End of Phantastes, a fairy romance for men and women by George MacDonald.